Most men discover their marriage is over when divorce papers arrive on their doorstep, an official, clinical end to what was once a shared life. I wasn't afforded such a neat conclusion. My revelation came in the damp, musty air of my own basement, a place I had always associated with mundane storage and the quiet hum of machinery. By the time the terrifying reality truly solidified in my mind, my name, the very mark of my identity, was already plastered across evidence I'd never touched, connecting me to a nightmare I never could have conceived. My name is Lewis Jackson. I'm 51 years old, a man of quiet routines and simple pleasures. My life, until very recently, felt comfortably predictable. I own a modest, well-maintained 3-bedroom house in the heart of Columbus, Ohio. On Saturday mornings, I dedicate myself to coaching youth soccer, finding genuine joy in the muddy fields and the boundless energy of 10-year-olds. Until just 11 days ago, a mere blink in the grand scheme of my life, I genuinely believed I was one of the luckier men alive, blessed with a stable home, a decent job, and a wife I adored. We'll get to how that illusion shattered. But before we dive deeper into this unraveling, could you do us a quick favor? Go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. So many people listen without ever doing it, but it truly costs you nothing and it means everything to us. And while you're at it, tap the like button too. When you're done listening, please drop your thoughts in the comments. I promise you, you are going to love it here. Now, let me tell you about my wife. Her name is Claire Ann Jackson. We were married for 15 years, a relationship that began 18 years ago, stretching back to our early 30s. She likes lavender candles, the kind that fill a room with a deceptively soothing scent. She's obsessed with true crime podcasts, a detail which, in chilling hindsight, should have blared like a red flag the size of Montana, casting a long, ominous shadow over our seemingly peaceful life. And she takes her coffee with exactly 1 sugar and a delicate splash of oat milk, a seemingly insignificant detail etched into my memory, a symbol of the intimacy I thought we shared. I knew this woman. I knew her down to her very core. Or, at least, I thought I did. This entire meticulously constructed nightmare began on a Tuesday in February, a month that, even under normal circumstances, feels like the year's most oppressive. Claire was away in Atlanta, visiting her college roommate Donna. She'd been gone for 3 days, and I, blissfully unaware, was living my best bachelor life. Cereal for dinner? Absolutely. Sports blaring on every screen in the house? You bet. Wearing the same comfortable hoodie for 48 hours straight without a second thought? Honestly, I was thriving. Then, the furnace began to make a sound. It wasn't one of the normal sounds, not the familiar groan or the rhythmic click that every furnace emits when the outside temperature plummets low enough to freeze your good judgment solid. This was something else entirely. A low rhythmic grinding, like some hungry metallic creature chewing on something it absolutely shouldn't. It was unsettling enough to break through my bachelor reverie. I grabbed my phone and called the very first HVAC company that popped up on Google. A guy named Dale showed up about 40 minutes later, pulling into my driveway in a well-worn service van. Dale Briggs from Briggs & Sons, Heating and Cooling. He was a nice enough fellow, with a big bushy mustache that seemed to exude competence. He smelled faintly of coffee and motor oil, a comforting scent of honest labor. "Give me 20 minutes, Dale announced, already heading toward the basement door. I gave him 20 minutes, retreating to the kitchen. I made myself a sandwich, a simple turkey and Swiss, and then settled onto the couch to watch half a highlight reel of last night's basketball game. Just living, you know? Completely mundane, utterly normal. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Dale, who was, at that very moment, literally in my basement. "Mr. Jackson, there's a locked door behind your storage shelves. Who's inside?" I actually laughed out loud, a short, disbelieving bark of amusement. It had to be a joke or a misunderstanding. I typed back immediately, "Dale, buddy, we don't have a locked door back there." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then reappeared as he typed. My sandwich lay half chewed in my hand. "Sir, I can hear breathing inside and there are 4 padlocks on the outside." I stopped chewing. My jaw went slack. Asterisk. 4 padlocks on the outside. Asterisk, I want you to truly grasp the chilling significance of that single detail, because in that initial moment, my mind couldn't fully process it. Locks on the outside times of a door don't keep intruders out. No, they keep whatever's times inside times in. That's not a security measure. That's a cage. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I was down those basement stairs in 10 seconds flat, my heart hammering against my ribs. Dale was standing in front of our old metal storage shelves, the ones Claire had stubbornly insisted we keep, even though I'd suggested donating them no fewer than 3 separate times over the years. They were now pulled slightly, almost imperceptibly, away from the concrete wall. Behind them, perfectly concealed, was a door I had never, in 15 years of living in that house, ever seen before. 15 years. A lifetime, really, to uncover such a thing. It was a plain, hollow core door, painted the exact same battleship gray as the surrounding basement wall, designed to blend in seamlessly. If the shelves were flush against it, which they always had been, you would never ever know it existed, but there it was. And on it, 4 heavy-duty padlocks, each secured to its own separate, formidable hasp. And from behind that door, faint but utterly unmistakable, came the slow, rhythmic sound of breathing. "Call the police," I rasped to Dale, my voice barely a whisper. "Already dialing," he said, his own face pale with a mixture of confusion and alarm. 3 officers arrived within 8 minutes, their flashing blue lights painting eerie patterns on the basement walls. I stood in my own home, feeling like an alien, a stranger in someone else's nightmare, as they efficiently went about cutting the locks. All the while I kept texting Claire. "Hey, call me. Something's going on." No response. Asterisk. She was probably at dinner with Donna. Asterisk, I told myself. I needed to tell myself something, anything, to anchor myself in sanity. The door swung open, revealing nothing. The room was utterly empty. Not just empty, but meticulously swept. A clean concrete floor stretched before us. A single bare bulb hung overhead, not even switched on. In one corner, a small Bluetooth speaker, still warm to the touch, pulsed faintly, and on the floor next to it, precariously balanced on a cardboard box, lay a cheap burner phone, its screen cracked like a spider web. The breathing, the ominous sound that had lured us all down here, had been a recording, looping, triggered remotely. Officer Tate, a young guy who looked like he'd just graduated high school last Thursday, picked up the burner phone with gloved hands and turned it over carefully. "Someone activated this recently," he said, his voice quiet, like within the last hour. "So, someone triggered it while Dale was down here?" I asked, a growing knot of dread tightening in my stomach. "Looks that way," Tate confirmed, meeting my gaze. "I need you to really stay with me here, because this was the precise moment the floor started moving under my feet, even though I was standing completely still. Someone knew Dale was in my basement. Someone waited until he was near those shelves, then triggered a recording specifically designed to make a furnace repairman text his client in alarm. Specifically designed to make that client call the police. Specifically designed to put 3 police officers, badges and guns and all, into a secret room in my house. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't some random act of vandalism. This was choreography. This was a stage play, and I was the unwitting lead actor. They found the storage unit receipt 48 hours later. I don't know exactly when the shift happened, when I stopped being the bewildered homeowner and started being a person of interest, but it happened quietly, insidiously, the way truly bad things usually do. One minute, Officer Tate was asking routine questions, his polite young face trying to mask his professional skepticism. The next, a detective named Roy Callahan was sitting across from me at my own kitchen table, a yellow legal pad open before him, his gaze unwavering. He asked if I'd ever been to a storage facility on Mercer Road. I had not, except, according to the meticulously kept records, I had. Twice. Paid in cash. My name was clearly printed on the rental agreement, and when they opened Unit 114 they found women's clothing, a prepaid debit card linked to an account in my name, and a photograph. It was a woman I had never ever seen before in my life. Mid-30s, dark hair, smiling innocently at the camera, like she had no earthly idea what her photograph would one day be used for. "Mr. Jackson," Detective Callahan said, his eyes watching my face with unnerving intensity, "this woman was reported missing 11 days ago. Her name is Angela Pruitt. Do you know her?" "No," I said, my voice hoarse. "I've never seen her in my life." And that was true. Completely, absolutely, unequivocally true. Every fiber of my being screamed its truthfulness. But here's the thing that broke something profound open inside my chest, leaving a cavernous, icy void. The thing I couldn't bring myself to tell Detective Callahan that night. because I needed to be utterly alone to process the horrifying implication of it all. When I finally got home, after hours of questioning, I went straight upstairs. I walked into our bedroom, the sanctuary Claire and I had shared for 15 years, and headed directly to the shelf above her nightstand. It was where she kept her cherished books, the ones she'd already devoured, the ones she revisited like old friends, the ones she kept closest to her heart. I pulled them out one by one, a methodical, agonizing search, and there she was, Angela Pruitt, her smiling face printed on a small, square photo, neatly tucked inside the back cover of Claire's worn copy of Times in cold blood asterisk, still smiling. I sat down, heavily, on the edge of the bed we had shared for a decade and a half, in the house that suddenly felt profoundly no longer mine. I held that photograph of a missing woman, a photograph my wife had hidden in plain sight, and all 18 years of our life together flashed before my eyes. Every shared dinner, every sun-drenched vacation, every quiet Sunday morning where I'd watched her read that exact book, coffee mug in hand. One sugar, a splash of oat milk, completely unbothered. How long had Angela Pruitt's smiling face been hidden inside that back cover? How long had Claire been planning this elaborate, cruel deception? At 51, I'd always thought the worst thing that could happen to a man was losing his health, his job, or his mind. It turns out the absolute worst thing is realizing the person who slept beside you for 15 years, the person you loved with your entire being, was never truly there at all. If you've been listening for a while and you want stories like this to keep coming, it genuinely helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. Thank you, for real. Here's something nobody tells you about being framed by your own wife. The hardest part isn't grappling with the overwhelming, damning evidence stacked against you. It's the gut-wrenching realization that the woman you loved was never confused, never lost, never simply going through a phase. No, she was always relentlessly, always working *. I need you to understand where I was mentally at this point, how truly unmoored I felt. It had been 6 days since Dale Briggs's chilling text from my basement. 6 days since 3 police officers stood in that eerily swept empty room in my house, their gazes lingering on me, marking me as a man who needed watching. 6 days since Detective Roy Callahan, a figure of quiet menace, started showing up. Not always announced, not always with a fresh list of questions, sometimes just present. Parked one house down from my house, a black Crown Victoria idling subtly on our quiet residential street, as if I wouldn't notice. I noticed Roy. I'm 51, not blind. Claire had come home from Atlanta 2 days after the basement incident. I hadn't told her everything on the phone, just a clipped summary, that something strange had happened, and she needed to come back. When she finally walked through the door, her face was a perfect tableau of a worried wife. Concerned eyes, a tight hug that felt both comforting and utterly hollow, both hands cupping my face. "Louis, what happened? Are you okay?" she asked, her voice laced with what I desperately wanted to believe was genuine fear. And God help me. For about 45 minutes, a fragile part of me actually believed her. She cried when I showed her the hidden room. Real tears, or what looked like real tears, and I'm still not entirely sure, even now, that there's a discernible difference. She held my arm, her grip seemingly comforting, while I explained the padlocks, the speaker, the burner phone, the entire orchestrated charade. She said all the right things, uttered with pitch-perfect empathy. "That's terrifying. Who would do this? Should we get a lawyer?" That last one. Asterisk. Should we get a lawyer? Asterisk. At the time, I thought she was being protective, advocating for me. Now, with the cold clarity of hindsight, I understand she was being precise. Her perfect, grief-stricken performance fractured for a fleeting second when the storage unit entered the conversation. When Detective Callahan came back 4 days later, his presence filling our kitchen with unspoken tension, and told us both about Unit 114 on Mercer Road, I watched Claire's face. Most people wouldn't have caught it. It lasted maybe half a heartbeat, a tiny, almost involuntary stillness that rippled across her features, like a computer screen freezing for an infinitesimal moment before smoothly recovering. Then the tears came back, fresh and seemingly effortless. "Someone is setting Louis up," she declared firmly, reaching across the kitchen table to grasp my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine, a public display of solidarity. "This is obviously a setup. My husband has never been to that storage unit." Callahan looked at her, then at me, then back at her, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Jackson," he said, his tone carefully neutral, How do you know it's obvious? She didn't miss a beat. Her answer was immediate, unwavering. Because I know my husband. I replayed that moment approximately 400 times over the next 48 hours, dissecting every syllable, every nuance. She didn't say, he would never do something like this. She didn't say, that's impossible. He's a good man. She said she times knew times me. She kept the focus on certainty, on her intimate knowledge of me, rather than appealing to my character or moral rectitude. It was a lawyer's answer, carefully constructed and precisely delivered, dressed up in a wife's voice. And it was chillingly effective. Here's where it starts getting truly architectural. Stay with me, because this is where the intricate design of her betrayal began to reveal itself. I have a friend named Gary Howell. We've been friends since college, a bond forged in shared experiences and late-night study sessions. That means he's known me long enough to deliver hard truths without flinching, to look me in the eye and say what needs to be said, no matter how uncomfortable. Gary works in insurance fraud investigation, which means he spends his entire professional life dissecting how people construct lies so elaborate, so cunning, that they masquerade as truth. I called him on day 7, the weight of the evidence and Claire's baffling composure pressing down on me. I told him everything, from the strange furnace noise to the locked room, the storage unit, Angela Pruitt, and Claire's unyielding denial. He was quiet for a long time, the kind of silence that stretches, heavy with unspoken concern. Louis, he finally said, his voice measured, how many joint accounts do you and Claire have? 3, I replied, almost automatically. Checking, savings, and a household credit card. Who manages them? I opened my mouth to answer, then closed it. The words caught in my throat. Claire managed them. She had, ever since year 2 of our marriage, when I'd offhandedly mentioned finding budgeting tedious, and she'd, with a sympathetic smile, offered to handle it all. I hadn't thought about it since. Why would I? The bills were paid on time, our savings steadily grew. Everything seemed perfectly fine. Pull every statement, Gary instructed, his voice firm. Every single one. Go back 5 years minimum. I pulled 7. What I found didn't scream at me from the pages, didn't unleash a torrent of immediate damning evidence. That was the genius of it, the diabolical brilliance. There were no dramatic, sudden withdrawals, no suspicious multi-thousand-dollar transfers to offshore accounts that would make a movie audience gasp in unison. Instead, there were small, patient, methodical movements. $100 here, routed to an account I didn't recognize. A recurring subscription charge to a business name I'd never heard of. A cash withdrawal every 3rd month, always just under the threshold that would trigger a flag, always subtle enough to slip past unnoticed. Over 7 years, it added up to just over $60,000. $60,000 moved so quietly, so incrementally, that I'd never heard a single sound of it leaving our accounts. I sat at my kitchen desk at 2. 0 inches the morning, the harsh glow of the screen illuminating those cold, hard numbers, and felt something I can only describe as a specific kind of cold. Not the cold of fear, no. This was the cold of time's scale asterisk. The horrifying realization that this wasn't something Claire had decided to do after a bad year or a rough patch, some impulsive act of desperation. The first irregular transaction was dated just 14 months after our wedding. She started planning this when we were still unpacking boxes in our first apartment together, 14 months in. Gary came over the very next morning. We spread everything across the dining room table. The crumpled bank records, the storage unit paperwork, the police report, and a sprawling, frantic timeline I'd built on a legal pad at 3 a.m. Gary studied it all for a long time without speaking, which is his way of being profoundly respectful about the fact that what he's looking at is infinitely worse than you think it is. The storage unit rental, he said finally, breaking the heavy silence. Walk me through your phone that week. What do you mean? I asked, confused. Where was your phone the night before the rental agreement was signed? I thought about it, picturing my nightly routine. On the nightstand, I replied. I always charge it overnight on the nightstand. Gary looked at me, his gaze unblinking. And where was Claire? The bedroom, obviously, I said, a flicker of irritation at the seemingly obvious question. We shared a bedroom. We shared a bed. We had for 15 years, and I had never, not once, thought of my charging phone on my nightstand as a vulnerability. But she had. She had taken my phone while I slept, driven to Mercer Road, signed the rental agreement in my name. She knew my signature the way you know a song you've heard 10,000 times. Paid cash, set up the unit, and been back in bed before my alarm even went off. I thought about the morning after. Had she seemed different? Tired? Off? I couldn't remember. I couldn't remember because it was a Tuesday, and on Tuesdays I leave early for a 7:00 a.m. budget call. I kiss her forehead, grab my travel mug, and I don't look back. 18 years of not looking back. The furnace call, Gary said quietly, shifting his focus. I looked at him, my mind scrambling to keep up with the relentless parade of revelations. You said you called the HVAC company the morning the furnace started making noise. Did you call from your cell or your landline? We don't have a landline, I said, stating the obvious. We haven't had one in years. Cell. Pull your outgoing call log for that morning. I already knew what I was going to find before I found it. I think some part of me, a deep, primal part, had known ever since the moment Dale texted me from the basement. I just hadn't been ready to look directly at it, to face the full horror. The call to Briggs & Sons Heating and Cooling had been made from my number at 8:47 a.m. I had been at the office by 7:00 a.m. I had a timestamp on my parking garage entry to prove it. Claire had made the call. From my phone, which she'd taken again, or perhaps just kept, and used to schedule a repairman she knew would go to the basement, find the shelves, find the door, hear the breathing, and text me an alarm. She had engineered the entire first act. The furnace noise. I still don't know precisely how she did it, but Gary suspects a small, sophisticated mechanical device attached to the blower, something simple, something removable, leaving no trace. The secret room itself, meticulously built or discovered and prepared over God knows how long. The recording, the burner phone, the precise timing of the remote trigger. She had stood in Atlanta, at dinner with Donna, and with one tap on a remote app on her own phone, she had set the whole thing in motion, while I, the oblivious husband, ate a sandwich and watched highlights upstairs. Louis, Gary said, and his voice had dropped to that specific, somber register men use when they're about to say something they desperately wish they didn't have to. This isn't a plan someone puts together in a few months. The financial movement alone goes back 7 years. The identity construction, your name on accounts you didn't open, your fingerprints on a storage unit you didn't visit, that takes practice, repetition, and almost obsessive attention to detail. She didn't just study you. He paused, letting the words hang in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. She became fluent in you. I stood up from the dining room table, the meticulous blueprint of my undoing still spread out before me, and walked to the kitchen window. I looked out at the backyard, the yard I'd mowed 1,000 times, the garden Claire had planted 2 summers ago, which I'd helped water every single evening that fall, because she said the delicate seedlings needed consistency. I had watered her garden while she was meticulously building my grave. At 51 years old, stripped bare of illusions and trust, I had one move left. I hadn't told Gary about it yet. I hadn't told anyone, because the only way it would work, the only way my counterplan had a chance, was if Claire believed, completely and convincingly, that her grand design had succeeded. She needed to think she'd won, that she had outsmarted me, and I needed her to stay comfortable, complacent, just long enough for me to make my move. There is a particular kind of quiet that falls over a man when he stops being afraid and starts being dangerous. I found that quiet on a Wednesday morning, sitting alone at my kitchen table with cold coffee and 7 years of damning bank statements spread before me. And in that quiet, I made a decision, a cold, unwavering choice, that I have not lost 1 minute of sleep over since. Here's another asterisk, something else nobody tells you. I did not call a lawyer. I did not confront Claire in a dramatic scene worthy of one of her true crime podcasts. I did not go back to Detective Callahan, brandishing the stacks of evidence Gary and I had meticulously uncovered. Because here's the brutally simple truth about evidence. It only works if the person presenting it is credible. And right now, in the eyes of the Columbus PD, I was a 51-year-old man whose name was on a storage unit containing a missing woman's belongings, linked to a phantom secret room in his own basement. My credibility was not exactly at its peak. Claire had thought of that too. Of course she had. She'd accounted for every contingency, every predictable reaction. So, I did the only thing she hadn't planned for. I became someone she couldn't read. First, I called my brother, Dennis Jackson, retired Army, currently living a quiet, orderly life in Dayton. He's the kind of man who owns 3 guns legally, speaks in short, clipped sentences, and has never, in his entire life, panicked about anything. I drove to Dayton on a Thursday morning, telling Claire I needed a few days to clear my head, to process everything. I watched her face arrange itself into the perfect, sympathetic expression of understanding. "Take all the time you need, baby," she said, her voice soft with feigned concern. I almost smiled. At Dennis's kitchen table, over steaming black coffee and leftover cornbread, I laid out everything. The basement, the storage unit, the bank records, the call logs, the chilling photograph tucked inside Time's in cold blood asterisk. Dennis listened without interrupting, which, for him, is the equivalent of anyone else screaming in horror and tearing their hair out. When I finished, he was quiet for a long, heavy moment. "You said she talks to someone," he finally said, his gaze fixed on mine. "Someone she trusts." "Her friend Renee," I confirmed. "Renee Gallagher. They've been close since before Claire and I even met. They talk every week, sometimes twice. In person or phone. Both. Renee lives in Cincinnati. She visits maybe 4 times a year. They also do these long calls, 2-3 hours sometimes. Claire always takes them in the sunroom, with the door closed." Dennis nodded slowly, processing the information. "How long ago did you put the baby monitor in the sunroom?" I looked at him, completely taken aback. He looked back at me, his face utterly straight, devoid of any hint of a joke. "Dennis," I said, a faint incredulity in my voice, "I haven't." "I know you haven't," he replied, his voice calm, pragmatic. "But you're about to. Here is something I want to be absolutely clear about. I am not a vengeful man by nature. I coached youth soccer for 11 years, fostering teamwork and sportsmanship. I have never, in my entire life, thrown a punch outside of a gym. I am the man at the cookout who makes sure everyone has a drink, who remembers the vegetarians and makes sure they have something good on the grill. Vengeance is not in my original wiring. But I am an extremely patient man, and patience, it turns out, is the only currency that truly matters in a long game." Dennis ordered the monitor online. He paid cash at a UPS store kiosk, had it shipped to a P.O. box. The kind of operational precision that 18 years in the Army apparently just permanently installs in a person. I drove back home on Saturday, told Claire I felt better, more clear-headed. I let her hug me in the doorway, her arms wrapped around my waist, and I counted her heartbeats against my chest, feeling absolutely nothing. That was the strangest part of all. Not rage, not overwhelming grief, just a profound, unsettling clarity. I installed the monitor on a Sunday afternoon while Claire was out grocery shopping. It was a small wireless device, easily tucked behind a decorative plant on the sunroom windowsill, a plant I had never once moved in 15 years, and neither had she. It took me all of 4 minutes. That evening, I drove back to Dennis's, confirmed the audio feed was crystal clear on his laptop, and then drove home for dinner. Claire made pasta, a comforting dish she knew I loved, and asked if I was feeling more like myself. "Getting there," I said, offering a small, convincing smile. She smiled back, a picture of a loving wife, and refilled my water glass. I waited 19 days, 19 agonizing days of being Lewis Jackson, the loving husband, the cooperative resident, the casual subject of a missing persons investigation. 19 days of answering Callahan's probing questions patiently, of letting Claire hold my hand in front of him, of watching her perform concern so flawlessly that even I, the direct object of her betrayal, had moments, brief, disorienting moments, of wondering if I'd constructed the entire conspiracy in my own grief-stricken mind. Then, on a Thursday evening in the 3rd week, Renee Gallagher came to visit. I made myself scarce, telling Claire I was heading to Gary's for the evening. I kissed her cheek, a chaste, meaningless gesture, and drove exactly 4 blocks before parking and opening my phone. The audio feed was crystal clear. They talked for 20 minutes about ordinary things. Renee's job, a cousin's upcoming wedding, a new restaurant in Cincinnati worth the drive. I almost convinced myself I was wrong, that I had planted a listening device in my own sunroom based purely on paranoia, pain, and Gary Howell's insurance fraud instincts. Then Claire's voice shifted. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, like a musician dropping from one key to another. Same instrument, same hands, but everything about the sound was different. She got quieter, more precise, every word carefully chosen. The warmth drained out of her tone the way water drains from a bathtub, steadily and completely, leaving only a cold, hard porcelain surface. "He has no idea," Claire said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. Renee was quiet for a moment. "You're sure? He's walking around here making me coffee in the mornings. Roy is treating him like a suspect, and he's just Louis. He's exactly who he's always been. He can't see past what's in front of him. He never could. And the woman? Angela? Renee pressed, her voice tentative. Safe, Claire said, a note of satisfaction in her tone. She agreed to disappear for 60 days. She's in Phoenix. I paid her well enough that she won't talk. And by the time 60 days is up, Louis will be too buried to matter. A pause stretched between them, thick with Renee's dawning realization. Claire. Renee's voice was careful, uncertain, tinged with a dawning horror. What happens to him actually happens. Renee's voice, barely a whisper, was a fragile thread woven through the silence, still thin with shock and the nascent horror of understanding. Her eyes, wide and searching, pleaded for a denial that Claire would never give. He becomes the answer to a question the police are already asking, Claire said simply, her tone devoid of emotion, almost scientific in its detached precision. They have his name, his prints, his financial trail. I just have to let it finish building. Another few weeks and it won't need me anymore. It'll have its own gravity, its own unstoppable momentum. She spoke as if describing a complex, elegant machine, rather than the calculated destruction of a human life. And you'll beware, Renee pressed, a desperate flicker in her gaze, perhaps still hoping for an escape route, a way to make sense of the monstros. What actually happens to him? Renee's voice, still thin with a dawning horror, barely registered above the quiet hum of the phone line. He becomes the answer to a question the police are already asking, Claire replied, her tone utterly devoid of emotion, as if discussing a grocery list. They have his name, his prints, his financial trail. I simply have to let it finish building. Another few weeks, and it won't need me anymore. It'll have its own gravity, pulling everything down around him. And you'll be where? Renee pressed, the question a desperate plea for a different outcome, a shred of remorse. Somewhere warm, Claire said, a genuine easy laugh bubbling up, a sound so relaxed, so utterly amused, it sent a chill down my spine even from 4 blocks away. It was the kind of laugh that only comes when every single, intricate piece of a meticulous plan has clicked perfectly into place, when fate itself has bowed to your will. I sat there, in my parked car, the engine silent, the cool night air seeping through the vents. My wife, the woman who shared my bed, was laughing about the elaborate architecture of my destruction. And then it settled over me again, that profound, absolute quiet, not of sound, but of spirit, cold, still, and utterly definitive. In that moment, the frantic urge to reach out, to call Dennis, Gary, or even Detective Callahan, evaporated. Not yet. Not like this. First, I needed to tell them about Angela Pruitt, because Angela Pruitt mattered. She was the linchpin, the unseen thread Claire had carelessly left dangling. 2 days after Renee's visit, I made my move. I hired Carl Upton, a retired Columbus PD detective, highly recommended by Gary. Carl was the kind of man whose entire personality was a perfectly organized filing cabinet, methodical, no nonsense, and utterly devoid of frills. His office was a testament to his nature. Rows of steel cabinets, the air thick with the scent of old paper and dust. I gave Carl one singular instruction, its weight hanging heavy between us. Find Angela Pruitt. It took Carl 6 days. 6 days for the quiet, unassuming detective to unravel a key thread of Claire's carefully spun web. Angela was exactly where Claire had said, in Phoenix, settled into a nondescript, mid-range hotel on Camelback Road. Cash payments, a slightly altered name on the registry, details that spoke of a calculated effort to vanish, yet were easily traceable to someone like Carl. He delivered, not just with photographs and documented records, but with a notarized statement from Angela herself. It turned out Angela Pruitt, a woman simply needing money, hadn't quite grasped the full implications of her agreement. Her initial comfort with the situation had evaporated entirely the moment Carl, with his calm, unwavering gaze, explained the legal ramifications of being an accessory while sitting across from her in a bustling hotel lobby. Angela Pruitt was not a hardened criminal. She was a desperate woman who had made a catastrophic choice. She gave us everything. How Claire had located her, the amount she'd been paid, the precise instructions on how to disappear for 60 days. Her hands trembled as she signed the statement, tears streaming down her face for a full 10 minutes. And Carl, the man whose face was carved from granite, sat with her, patiently and quietly, until her sobs subsided. He was unexpectedly decent for a man who looked like he could file you away with extreme prejudice. Now I had it all. The chillingly casual conversation recorded from the sunroom, and a signed, tear-stained statement from the woman Claire believed was safely missing. Two pieces of incontrovertible evidence. Two things Claire had no idea existed. Here is what I did times not times do. I did not march into the Columbus PD and hand over this arsenal, because evidence presented by a suspect, no matter how exonerating, immediately becomes entangled in a protracted legal process. A long, grinding, and very public process during which Claire, with her razor-sharp legal mind, would lawyer up, go silent, and dedicate the next 18 months to systematically dismantling everything I had built, piece by agonizing piece, from the other side of the courtroom. She was terrifyingly good at dismantling. I knew that now, with a clarity that stung. So, I opted for something far simpler, far more surgical. On a quiet Friday evening, while Claire was ensconced in the sunroom, engrossed in a copy of Times, in cold blood times no less, the sheer breathtaking audacity of the woman, I sat at our kitchen table. From an anonymous email address she had never seen, I sent two things to a phone number she wouldn't recognize. An audio file containing her own words, and a photograph of Angela Pruitt very much alive and well in Phoenix, conspicuously holding that day's newspaper. No message, no name, no explanation. I simply closed my laptop, washed my coffee mug, and went to bed. 40 minutes later I heard her. The subtle creak of the stairs, the almost imperceptible rustle of her movement. Through barely open eyes, I watched as she stood in our bedroom doorway, phone clutched in her hand, completely, unnervingly still. In 15 years of marriage, I had never once seen Claire Ann Jackson stand entirely motionless. She was a woman in perpetual motion, always arranging, adjusting, managing, orchestrating. But there she was, frozen, like a seasoned hunter, who had just heard a sound she couldn't locate, a threat that defied identification. Asterisk. Good. Asterisk. The next morning, the air still crisp with the promise of autumn, I drove directly to Detective Callahan's office. On his desk, I placed Carl Upton's full, meticulously compiled report. Angela's statement, the photographs, the financial records, the call logs, all neatly organized within a navy blue folder, secured with a sturdy metal clasp, a testament to my thoroughness. Callahan, a man of few words but sharp perception, read for 11 minutes straight, his gaze never once lifting from the pages. "Mr. Jackson," he finally said, his voice flat, devoid of surprise. "Roy," I corrected, meeting his gaze. "And I think we both know I didn't rent that storage unit." He looked at me for a long, silent moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging heavy in the air. Then, with a decisive movement, he picked up his phone. Claire Ann Jackson was arrested on a Tuesday. 14 charges, including conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction. They walked her out of our house in handcuffs at precisely 9:00 a.m. It was a morning cold enough to see your breath, the sharp air mirroring the harsh reality of her downfall. I watched from the doorway, the frame of our home a silent witness. As they guided her towards the patrol car, she looked back once, just once, and for the first time in 18 years, I couldn't read her face. I couldn't find the calculation behind those normally astute eyes, couldn't locate the cunning woman who had studied me like a forger meticulously studies a signature. Her face was simply blank. She just looked, and I nodded, because here was the fundamental truth. The one thing Claire Ann Jackson never understood about me, the catastrophic miscalculation at the very heart of her flawless plan. She had spent years watching what I did, where I went, how I signed my name, how I slept. She knew my habits, my routines, my every predictable move, but she had never once paid attention to what I was times thinking. Asterisk. At 51 years old, I am not a dramatic man. I don't make grand speeches. I don't slam doors in fits of rage. I don't need the last word in an argument. I simply need the last move. She spent 15 years meticulously building a prison for me. I built her one in 19 days. Somewhere out there, Claire Ann Jackson is now forever looking over her shoulder, searching for a ghost she inadvertently created, a man she profoundly underestimated, a husband she deluded herself into believing she knew completely. She knew my signature, yes, but she never truly knew my spine, and that, in the end, was always going to be her only, and fatal, mistake. If you enjoyed this raw and real journey, Be sure to join our growing community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more family-centered stories of unexpected turns and profound truths. As always, thank you for being a part of Dad's Raw Revenge. I'll see you on the next one.